How's it going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Horse Torques Diesel channel. Gonna be talking about head gaskets today and head studs. A lot of people ask what the differences is between just a regular head gasket, like on the 12 valve, these new MLS gaskets on the common rails. Then you have your O-ring head gasket, and you also have a fire ring head gasket. A lot of it depends on what you're doing with the truck, and it also depends on what head studs or head bolts, stuff like that. Generally, turbochargers has a big play in it. Compound turbos obviously make a lot more boost, and generally speaking, a regular head gasket is usually not up to par. For my trucks, my 6.7 swap that's going in, my 05 that's outside, is going to have just a stock MLS head gasket with 625 ARP head studs. It's going to be a single turbo truck. The block has been machined flat, and so has the cylinder head. Head gasket failure is due to quite a few things, but for starters, the engine surface and the head surface from the factory aren't always straight. So if you have these bolts trying to clamp down on this, if it's perfectly flat, it's not an issue. All they have to do is fight the head trying to lift off. Now if you have, let's just exaggerate, a cylinder block like this, or sorry, an engine block like this, and you have a cylinder head that maybe is a little cocked and you're trying to clamp it, not only is your head fastening hardware trying to hold it from going up, but now it's fighting almost a horizontal tension as well. So whenever I do head studs, it's kind of my call. I've done them one at a time. I've done it where I've taken the head and had it serviced, and then I've done it where I've had both surfaces done. Usually, especially on common rails, you can get away with the one at a time head gasket. These MLS gaskets seal really well. The reason why the 6.7 has such a harder time, this is actually a 6.7 head gasket, is the bore is larger. Anytime you have to span a wider gap, the amount of stress becomes larger, and that's why you see failures. So you have three different types. You have a stock head gasket like this one, and the firings are inside here. You have an O-ring head gasket, which uses a stock head gasket, and then there's a stainless steel wire that sits between the head gasket and the cylinder head. And then you have your firing gasket. This one's from Keating. Hasley and Keating both make one. I had a cylinder head that was cut for Keating, and now I have a cylinder head cut for Hasley, so I use Hasley's. The rings are a little bit of a different dimension. Now, stock head gasket, if that's what your budget is, and you're staying on like a single turbo, you should be fine. Boost is a killer of head gaskets mostly, and it's not even really boost, it's also the drive pressure that compounds create when that boost pressure gets up there. So a factory head gasket, some people say 45, some people say 50. I've personally had them up to 60 with the good head studs. The 625 head studs have the best clamping in a 12mm stud, which is what all factory Cummins engine blocks come with. Hasley, and I believe maybe a couple other companies offer a 14mm stud, but you have to get your engine drilled and tapped for a 14mm stud, and you're able to apply even much more clamping force. But that kind of gets out of the budget. Head studs are something I generally don't cheap out on. I usually buy the best ones. I've had a lot better luck with them, and you can reuse them. So if you have a single turbo truck and you know you're going to stay relatively low on the boost number, 50, maybe 55. You know, you're starting to get outside of that efficiency window of the turbo anyway. The cheap head studs will work. The ARP, everybody calls them 425s. They're actually ARP 2000s. They're the black ones, and they have a recommended installer torque of 125 foot-pounds. I'm not going to tell you. Well, you know what? Fine. I'll tell you. I usually torque them even higher than that. I've never broken one. That being said, you know, do what you want. I use plenty of assembly lube, and you kind of got to let the studs, I want to say, like cool off or rest in between the torques. And with ARP 2000s, I highly recommend doing a hot retorque, just like the instructions say, and then you drive the truck for a little bit, you know, a couple half pulls, and do one more torque, and then you kind of got to check on them. I know recently L19s have made a huge re-emergence to the diesel community. For what they cost compared to the 625s, I would just recommend you get the 625s. L19s, some people say they'll crush a fire ring. They will crush an O-ring. They will crush a stock head gasket as well. I'm just not sold on the fire rings. I've seen them fail versus the 625s. I haven't seen a lot of failures. A little trick I do when I install these head gaskets is, obviously the coolant's out of the engine. If you're replacing the head gasket, I will let the truck run for about 5 to 6 minutes with no coolant in it. You're not going to damage it. The engine is ultimately cooled by oil, as the oil squirters squirt oil onto the backside of the pistons, and then that coolant sucks a lot of the heat out of the oil. So you'll be fine. 5 to 6 minutes. I wouldn't recommend driving it, obviously, but 5 to 6 minutes at idle, you'll be fine. That gets it nice and hot very quickly. You can do your hot retorque and then proceed to drive it. I usually do about, I don't know, 50, 60 miles, couple half throttle pulls, nothing crazy. You really want them to set, and then you hit them with another torque. I generally take ARP 2000s on my own trucks. I'll take them up to like 145. Have caution. I mean, obviously the instructions say 125. I've never had one fail, but the choice is up to you. Now, on O-ring head gaskets, what they do is you're machining a groove, much like the one in this head here, much smaller though, and it's a stainless steel wire. And essentially what it does is that wire crushes into the factory head gasket firing and then seals into that recess in the cylinder head. They're recommended for about 70, 75 pounds boost, like a smaller compound towing setup. Definitely not what I would call an all-out race truck, but they are a very affordable way to do it, because O-ringing is done exclusively in the cylinder head. Last I checked, I think Hasley still offers a O-ring kit, and I believe ATS did a while back. Don't hold me to that. I have actually never personally used an O-ring. I've had friends that have, and I've installed them, but I've never personally used it. They seem to be a great budget-friendly option to compensate for a stock cylinder, or sorry, stock head gasket. Your final step is a firing kit, and essentially what they do is they take the factory head gasket, which is this right here. This happens to be for a 24 valve, and what they do is they actually cut the firing out of the head gasket, sorry, and they supply you with these rings. These rings are a 425 ID and a 446 OD. They're a mild steel ring. Like I said, this kit came from Keating. From what I've gathered, Hasley on a 5.9, the Hasley fire ring is much larger. This is actually cut for Keating fire rings. This was the old head. The new head obviously has the Hasleys. To be honest with you, I had good luck with both of them. I use 625s. Now the key to a firing setup is that hot retort. Once you get them sealed, they are very good. You know, it seems to be a toss-up with people, street truck, race truck, where the firing line is. If I'm going to be running compounds on a pretty high horsepower street truck, I would recommend that you go with the fire rings. It's not that much more expensive, and they provide a little bit better security. Basically what happens is, for instance on this cylinder head here, there's 3 ways you can do it. you can either have the firing cut all in the head, this depth here, or you can have the depth cut all the way in the block, or you can split it. Splitting it obviously is the strongest. However, in all my circumstances, I've always had it cut all in the head, and I've had pretty good luck. The only downside to cutting it in the cylinder head is you have to super glue the rings into the head as you install it, and you kind of got to keep an eye on it. I've never had a problem with the super glue method. Some people have. You know, just be careful. You can't really jar the head too much. Obviously, if you cut it in the block, or half in the block, half in the head, you're able to set that firing in the block and essentially install the head. A little bit easier, not gonna lie. I've installed a few that have been half and half, and it is much nicer. And they say they're stronger if you do half in, half out. But a lot of times what people do is they'll leave the block in the frame and they'll cut it in the head, which is still fine. This truck makes over 120 pounds of boost and more drive pressure than I know what to do with. And it's been fine with the full firing cut in the cylinder head with the 625s. Now, what do you do when you blow a head gasket? Besides curse and think about all the money you just lost, and probably wish you didn't screw around doing whatever you did to blow the head gasket. There's lots of different ways to replace the head gasket. Pulling the head off and putting a new one on, I think, is a complete waste of time and money. I live in California right now. I can still get a cylinder head surfaced for about 150 bucks. They'll even do it while you wait if you pay a rush fee. And it's just better insurance. Even though you're not getting the block surfaced, you know, you're still starting with at least one square surface, and then you can go install that new head gasket. If you have the time, you have the patience and the money, you know, I would highly recommend, like I did on my new 6.7 build I'm doing on my 05, is I got the block surfaced and the cylinder head surfaced. Like I said, that torsional, sorry, not torsional, but that pulling as it's crooked, just, you're asking for another failure. Also, when a head gasket blows, you're going to want to make sure that you're looking at the engine oil and the engine coolant to make sure that the cross leak isn't too bad. If it was, you should probably clean it out. What I recommend for the oil is putting cheap oil in it, running the truck, draining it, kind of flushing it out that way. Obviously, ideal would be to pull the engine apart, but some people aren't that lucky, and I totally understand. As far as types of head gaskets, I use Interstate McBee or Cummins Genuine. I get a lot of these parts from Pure Diesel Power. They're a company in Wisconsin, and they take really good care of me. They get the parts here fast, and they're packaged well. As far as the firing O-ring kits, they offer them, or you can contact Hasley or Keating Machine. Now, there is one thing you can do if you're going to stay with the stock turbo on a 12 valve or a common rail to get you by. If you have a head gasket that hasn't blown yet, what you can do is take your factory head bolts. These are torqued with a degree from the factory. I don't know what it is. I'm sure I can look it up, but off the top of my head, I don't know. What you can do is start at 100 foot-pounds and torque your head bolts by about 5 foot-pound increments, and you'll feel it. They'll start to give. It's almost like they get spongy. That's the last torque you should do. I've seen anywhere from like 120 to 135 foot-pounds factory head bolts. A lot of it depends on how old they are. Common rails, I usually can get a little higher than 12 valves. But it is a really cheap way to kind of secure that head gasket down a little bit, especially if you haven't had a failure and you're trying to stay around that like 400 horsepower mark. Just a little extra insurance. I have never broken a head bolt doing that, but I can tell you that I've had friends that have. So be extremely careful. If you get to like 120 and that's all you want to do, that's fine. It's kind of at your own risk. Like I said, it's not for everybody, but if you are on that really tight budget and you have a stock turbo truck that hasn't blown that head gasket and you're just going to turn up the fuel a little bit, I recommend this method. I've had a lot of success with it. I've held a 425 horsepower 12 valve for almost 40,000 miles like that, and never had an issue. And it was making like 40-45 pounds of boost. Just a little extra security. You know, if you want to take that advice, great. I think it works well. If you just want to do it the correct way and spend the money, then that way works well. Just kind of a budget option for some of you guys. You know, these parts aren't cheap, so anything you can do to save a buck, right? If the head gasket does blow and all you want to do is a factory replacement, I would just recommend getting new head bolts. Summit sells them. They can get them anywhere in about two days. Pretty affordable. I think they're like 150, 60 bucks. The ARP 2000s, what I recommend is getting a bottoming tap kit. I have them right here. I bought this on Amazon. I've done probably 16 engines. It's a 3-tap set. It comes like with the regular tap and then a bottoming tap. I just run it through. You're already doing the work. It takes about 20 extra minutes. You know, just do it. Nothing's worse than rushing a job and then having it fail again. After I'm done bottom tapping them, I like to take a vacuum and just kind of suck the debris out, and kind of spray some brake cleaner in there as well to clean those threads. You want the threads in the cylinder head and your fastening hardware to be as clean as possible to ensure a smooth torque sequence. With the ARP head studs, you need to make sure you use the lube. Now, I got lucky. I have 2 containers of the ARP lube in here, but what I have done, since I've done quite a few of these, main studs, all that kind of stuff, is I actually went ahead and bought their big tub. I think this was like 18 bucks. I've had it for about 2 years, and I still have about a quarter left. It's really nice. Then you can apply the liberal amount. You want to make sure you apply it on both sides of that washer and the underside of the nut, as well as the threads. There's no such thing as too much of that lube. It's not bad for your engine. At the same time, I wouldn't recommend squirting it into your cylinders, but you get the drill. When installing the head studs, doesn't matter which ones you have, you will install them. I recommend hand tight for your first time, and then I just generally thread them in. There's an Allen cut in the top of these. I will thread them in by hand, and once they hit a stop, I just check it with the Allen, and then I just back it off about a quarter turn, just so that way it's not bottomed out in the bottom of that engine block, and possibly when you go to torque it, crack that thread hole. I have never done that. I have read stories about people that have done that, and I don't want to be one of those guys. So, you know, take it for what it's worth. As far as 625s, I'll take them to 150, and then I take them a little bit farther. Like I said, these is what I do. It's not what the instructions say. To date, I have never broken a 625 stud. I usually take them to 165. And no, you are not going to pull the threads out of your block. I can promise you that. Now, what I do is I always do a hot retort. Whether it's a MLS gasket, an O-ring, or a fire ring, I always recommend that hot retort. And I still recommend going back in there after that 50 miles. Like I said, you just spent all this time, and if anybody's done it in the cab of a truck, especially a second gen, it is a total pain in the butt. On a common rail, same thing. I like to take the injectors out just because I really don't want to hit the injector solenoid pack while I'm torquing it. It's just a good safety measure. As far as the rest of the job, you know, just try to keep it as clean as possible. While you have the head off, it's a great time to check, you know, your engine cylinder bores for wear, stuff like that. The spray patterns in the pistons, you're able to determine, you know, especially on 12 valves, kind of where your timing's been at with the spray pattern in the bolt. And if you have a cylinder head out, it's always good to get it checked. 12 valve cylinder heads, I've never had one that wasn't cracked. It just depends on where the crack is, on how serious the matter is, if you need to buy a new cylinder head or not. For 12 valves, I think Hamilton makes an amazing cylinder head. They are new casted, and you know, they make a great product. I see lots of guys running them, had really good luck. The cylinder head in my race truck is actually from East Coast Diesel. I bought it off a guy on a Facebook page, and it came with, you know, a bunch of stuff, a nice port job, and Inconel valves. So that's why I didn't buy the Hamilton. But had I not have found that good of a deal, I would have purchased the Hamilton cylinder head. On the common rails, you know, same thing. You just want to check that cylinder head, check those valves. While the head's out, it's a great time to replace the valve seals on the top. If you want to do valve springs, you know, the cylinder head's already off. Much easier to do it when the head is out of the truck. Push rods, if you're doing the valve springs, and you know, kind of tie it in. If you have other stuff, when you go in there, you know, make that one count. I have heard of people reusing head gaskets. Maybe if I was in a pinch and it was like a firing kit, I might reuse it, but I would always recommend, if you take your cylinder head off, to get a new head gasket. And trust the machine, or sorry, get a machine shop you trust. You're counting on them to be, you know, doing these machining correctly. And make sure you check them. You know, have them bust out their straight edge with some feeler gauges and show you what's going on. Usually when I get a cylinder head machine, I'll sit there and I'll watch the surface machine go by, and you can see it's actually quite amazing how off these cylinder heads are from the factory. And it's kind of mesmerizing actually to watch them cut it. So other than that, I hope you guys learned a little bit about head stud and head gasket selection. You know, stock head gasket, stock turbo, you know, kind of a single turbo. If you machine the deck and the head flat, you know, they'll go a long way, especially with the good head studs. If you're just trying to get by on a stock turbo, you know, you can get new head bolts, especially if you have a 12 valve. I mean, these head bolts have been in service for, you know, about 20 years. You should spring for a new set. Or get the ARP 2000s. You know, there's nothing wrong with those head studs if you keep the boost and drive pressure down. The O-ring's a great thing, especially for compounds like stocker plus a 475 or maybe like a 362 475. They do really well. The O-ring kits do, and the fire rings are more for your competition. You know, I'm kind of split on this 6.7. Should I have fire ringed it? Should I not have? It just came down to, it's a street truck. I really hope I don't push it that hard, especially with it being, you know, a single turbo on a street truck. I'm gonna see, kind of test out my theory on machining the surfaces flat. But I do know the key to success on any head gasket is getting them as flat as you can, so it's just fighting that vertical tension, not the horizontal tension. If you guys have any other questions, go ahead and drop them down in the comments, and I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, press the like button. Trying to get people involved, kind of like a down and dirty on diesel performance, you know. Whatever you guys want to know, and hopefully I can help. And if I can't, I'm not going to lie to you. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there, and I really don't want to feed into that. So hope you guys have a great day. Catch you later.